Welcome, my friends, to Scott Marlowe's Creature Zone. My special guests and I will take a look at things that go bump in the night from a scientific perspective. Join us now as we delve deep into myth, legend, and folklore to uncover the truth about creatures that science would prefer to forget or ignore. Good evening, this is your host, Scott Marlowe for Creature Zone, and I'm with my friend and colleague, Adam Davies, who is on the air with us from Manchester, England, tonight. And how you doing, Adam?
I'm very good, Scott. It's good to talk to you.
I understand that you have a major piece of information for us tonight.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about a project that I was involved with Brian Sykes. If I tell you some of the details, and I can then obviously we can interact, and you can obviously you'll have lots of questions for me. But if I tell you in a nutshell the story at the beginning, then I think that might help to form some views. Is that okay with you?
Surely. We might even want to start with your latest trip to Indonesia.
Well, I haven't been to Indonesia for a couple of years. The last trip I did was the US. But this story kind of cuts into Indonesia, so it's relevant. It's relevant to your question. Is relevant to the story.
Okay. Well, then I'm just going to let you tell the story, and I'll ask questions when you want to take a break between points.
Okay. Well, in 2011 at the CFZ conference, I did a talk on the orang pendek, as you know, the Sumatran cryptid, the famous bipedal cryptid that is said to live in Sumatra, and I've spent a lot of time studying it. I've been to Sumatra some 8 times and collected a vast array of evidence, most recently with Cliff Barrettman on his project. There's been previous hair samples, lots of foot casts, things like that. But I talked at that conference, and Brian Sykes was in attendance there. And afterwards, we had a chat. And then, and he said, I was impressed by your talk. It was great to hear it, and I was very flattered. It was from somebody who is clearly an eminent scientist. It was very nice to hear those sort of compliments. Anyway, he invited me down to Oxford, and we spent some time talking. And he said that he was going to start a project, considering starting a project to gather hair samples, but and he wasn't sure whether he was going to do it. But to some degree, on the basis of my talk, he was persuaded that it was something he wanted to embark on. So we had a discussion about that and how the permutations of how that might work. Subsequent to that, I went to America in 2012. And I hooked up there with a team of people from the UK with Laurie Simmons. Now, Laurie's father, Don Wallace, had spent 28 years researching Bigfoot and the Bigfoot phenomena in his area. Laurie had carried on his research after that. So that research was her and her family's research, not mine, but I was interested in going to that area. I'd not really studied the Bigfoot phenomena to any degree. I'd been everywhere else but I was persuaded when I spoke to Jeff Meldrum when I was making China's Wild Man, a film in 2008 for Monster Class, that the Patterson-Gimlin film was a genuine. And after that, I started to get gradually interested in dipping my toe in it a little. So I decided I'd go, and I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose by going here. And there's a long story behind it, but essentially I was persuaded that there was a Bigfoot in that area. And when I got back, I told Brian Sykes about my experiences. Brian Sykes then was teaming up with Team Bigfootology, which is run by Rhett Mullins, and I'm a member, and so is Laurie. And he gave me a call and he said, I'd like to go and see Laurie when I'm out there. So I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll put you in touch. And Laurie agreed to take him to her area. Now, when he was at her area, he was, I think, shocked by the fact that he had some sort of experience which he couldn't rationalise. He heard subterranean knocking. It responded very clearly, or seemed to Laurie's voice and commands. And he was quite astounded by the whole thing. He wasn't ready to conclude that it was a Bigfoot. I think that was too much of a leap for him. But he was persuaded that there was something tangible there that he wished to investigate, which was amazing in itself. And there's so much information I could tell you, and you feel free to ask me questions subsequently. But as a headline, Brian was persuaded to fund a expedition launched with me and Laurie to go and try and gather evidence, DNA, hair analysis evidence of whether Bigfoot existed in this area. So we went on our own expedition. Brian worked with wildlife and fisheries in Oregon to have samples cleared and analysed by them, and he got the first ever Bigfoot scientific research permit in order to do that. There was no NDA involved. It was merely a word of trust. I promised him, as did Laurie, that we would not release any information about the amazing things that happened to us, and they were amazing, until after his book was released. And so this interview cannot and will not, and Scott, for your listeners, is a man who I trust. This interview will not go out until after the 25th of September, probably the first couple of weeks in October, and Scott's given me permission. What Scott agreed was that it would not be released until after that date, and I was good with that because I trust Scott. But the story is amazing in my opinion, for several reasons. Firstly, you have one of the world's leading geneticists going on a paid expedition. Secondly, being persuaded and funding the expedition himself. Secondly, being persuaded enough by the evidence before him to fund that expedition. And thirdly, getting a research permit to do that expedition. And some of the things that happened were really incredible. So it was remarkable. And his research itself, I mean, we've talked a lot. I mean, it's underplayed, I think, enormously about the discovery of the new bear species. But if you like, the overwhelming story for me personally was the fact that this was going on at the same time.
Well, let me break in here just at this point, as I'm not sure that all of our listeners will be aware of who Brian Sykes is. Mm-hmm. And then the media here, of course, has they're always searching for their unbelievable simplistic soundbite, has indicated that Brian believes that the abominable snowman, Yeti, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever, is just a variety of bear, and they're all bears. And I've made the point several times that that is not at all what Brian is saying. And, of course, what you just intimated indicates that if Brian had come to that conclusion, he would never have funded any kind of a research project.
No, absolutely.
That is indeed not what Brian is saying at all.
No, what Brian clearly said was that the samples that he had tested as part of his study did not point to a Bigfoot. But he also said that doesn't mean that Bigfoot does not exist. And the discovery of the new species of bear, this bear that was thought to exist 40,000 years ago, is an amazing achievement for cryptozoology and has been wildly underplayed by the media. But the significance of this story is that Brian was clearly actively funding and researching a project to look for a new species, and he was looking for Bigfoot. He was looking for Bigfoot with me and with Laurie. And that is the veracity of the story. That's what happened.
Surely, and I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, this is not the turn of the 19th to the 20th century when they're discovering mountain gorillas.
Yeah.
But it is every bit as important that he discovered that this ostensibly extinct bear still exists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that is a major piece of news that has been wildly underplayed, as you say. So maybe we better continue with the story because we're at 9 minutes in now, and we're going to have to take a break in about 6 minutes. So let me let you make the next point.
Okay, well, the bottom line is we went out in May last year to research this area, and what we did was we went. Laurie had been leaving foodstuffs for her, mainly things that were indigenous to the area. So she left apples for it, and it took the apples, or seemed to take the apples. A lot of this is assumptive, but it seemed to take the apples. So what we did was we put hair traps down to try and see if it would take hares. The thing seemed to be most people consider that Bigfoots are docile primarily, and I would certainly say that that's the case with most of them. But this one seemed to be extremely agitated and was not docile in any means. I mean, just before Brian got there, I went to check whether we would still get a result, because on some occasions it didn't, or it wasn't always there, and it banged and growled so loudly when Laurie and I approached it at one point that Laurie was too shaken up to go back. And so we had a rather bizarre scenario the next day where, after we'd left sample jars down, where Brian and I had to go and get the sample jars, and I was wondering whether I was going to bloody well come back, because it did really feel extremely dangerous, and I was hoping that it wouldn't be around at the time, I have to say. And when I heard it banging against the tree, I was like, oh shit, it's there. And Brian and I were quite perplexed. But Brian was very thorough and methodical. All of the research was documented. All of the photographs were taken. He worked with forensics in Oregon. So he had studied forensics, and we treated it in the same way as you would treat a crime area. And everything was methodically done and analysed, and it was a truly bizarre experience. There is so much I could tell you, Scott. I mean, some of the points were really quite amusing. We tried at one point to leave a scarf down of Laurie's to try and draw it out while we put a camera on the roadside to see if it would actually come out. The damn thing knew we were there and started knocking, and Brian amusingly, I mean very tongue-in-cheek, said, "Come out, you bloody thing, it's your last bloody chance." You know, so there was some amazing things that happened. I mean so many amazing things that happened. As far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know what he's writing in his book, but everything that I am telling you is my considered personal account of the events that happened. So I don't know what he's putting in his book, but this is my testament as to what happened on those events.
Certainly. I mean, it sounds like it was rather exciting.
Oh yeah, it was quite weird, really, as well. You know, I mean, I've been all over the world, as you know, and looked for a number of unknown species, but I never expected probably the strangest thing that had happened to me until that time would be, you know, in North America, frankly. You know, if it had been the Congo or somewhere like that, or even Sumatra, I might have gathered it, but I was amazed. But you know, as far as I'm concerned, Bigfoot really does exist, and the most important thing to do is to get corroborative scientific evidence. I am aware that my view that Bigfoot doesn't exist. So I'm aware that my view that Bigfoot exists rather makes me, in some ways, an advocate rather than an unbiased researcher. But what I do is ensure that any evidence that I gather is analysed by credible scientists. And so the results that they would produce would be objective and would be able to be replicated and produced by their peers, and that's what matters. Yeah. So my own views are almost irrelevant in the process, except in the fact that it's important to choose a research area which I think might be a good place to go and see what I can get. But I'm about hard scientific evidence, really. I'm about DNA. I'm less interested in photographs. I'm about DNA.
Very good. We're at 14 minutes, so now's a good time to take a break. And I will do that and be right back with my special guest, Adam Davies.
Boy, these woods sure are spooky. The Headless Horseman is supposed to be on the prowl here. There he is! Whoa! Hit the deck! He's coming back! Duck!
These things happen when you don't tune in to Creature Zone here on Pangea Radio, www.pangeainstitute.us. Hey, I'm back with my guest from Manchester, England, Adam Davies, who has been involved with Dr. Brian Sykes doing DNA research on the Bigfoot phenomenon, and we're really getting into a very fascinating story about his latest expedition here to the States.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was obviously an expedition I did last year. I've since been to the States in June this year, and some of the things that I thought of and used when I was in that research area in the Cascades, I applied to when I was in the States most recently. So, for example, on one occasion, Laurie and I were walking, and I heard a grunt, which was very ape-like, and I grunted in response, and I got grunts back, and there was a backwards and forwards grunt. So when I went to Derek Randall's Olympic project, I tried the same grunting noise in the Olympic project and got a grunt in response back, which has been talked about very recently. I got several clear grunts, and as a Bigfoot-like creature seemed to follow us down the path. And then Shane Corson, together with Shelley Covington Montana, had put down a recorder there. And that night, he was able to analyse that recorder and got grunts back. So what I was trying to do was repeat the experiment in a different area to see if the same noises, the same sounds that I'd heard in the Cascades were able to be reproduced in different areas. And that was what I was about. That was the main motivation for my trip to the US, because I'd heard these grunts. I'd heard these grunts in the Cascades, and I wanted to see if they could be reproduced in other areas. For example, in Derek Randall's Olympic project, in Matthew Johnson's SOA project, where Bigfoots were alleged to be, and see if I could get the same results there. So that was what I was about, and I was also keen to get more hair samples to see if they could be analysed for DNA. And the hair samples that I gathered as a result of this trip in June are being analysed now. So we will see what the outcome of those samples are. And we'll see fairly soon, I would think.
Well, with the recombinant technology, I think it takes like up to 6 weeks to do an analysis.
Yeah, I mean, Brian Sykes. The reason it took so long between Brian Sykes, me talking about what happened to Laurie and I, and Brian Sykes' research is because obviously he was waiting for stuff to come out, and he had a scientific paper on the bear to come out. And it was important that we didn't talk about that research, because it would have you don't talk about it until after it's been produced. Yeah, it was a trust thing that I promised I wouldn't talk about it publicly until afterwards. And it's been a long wait, I have to say, because I hear lots of talk in different groups and lots of things, and I haven't been able to say really what I wanted to say or say what my opinions are based on what I consider to be direct contact with Bigfoots. So there's many things I could say and many observations I could make about them. But I think the headline would be, most of them seem to be very docile. They seem to have a level of intellect which is greater than most apes, obviously, but they don't have, as you know, sophisticated tool use. But there was clearly a level of interaction and sentience with the Bigfoot, which I would consider, in my own opinion, to be greater than that of other great apes that I have encountered.
Yeah, and that's consistent with the consensus of, all the people who have really done research for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's great that the repeatability of those conclusions and the evidence that brought you to them is being reinforced.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and I think one of the things I'd say is the difference between now and even a few years ago, the contamination process with DNA was quite high. There was always this possibility of human contamination, but the procedure has really speeded up and got a lot better, and the risk of contamination is that much reduced. So,
yes.
So it's a lot better than it was. And
yeah, well, there are some bleaches and things that they can use now that doesn't damage the DNA, but does remove any surface contaminant that used to be a major problem. Just so our listeners understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. You set the context because I know you know the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you want to particularly ask me about the sciences research or the things that I was doing in America?
Well, if he hasn't completed the report yet, obviously he hasn't reached any conclusions that you're able to talk about. But if he has expressed some personal feelings at this point, that might be interesting to talk about.
Well, yeah, if you express those feelings, and then I'll say that, as far to the best of my knowledge, we weren't able to gather a sample which he was able to analyse as DNA from Bigfoot. And the main reason for that is we weren't able to get a clear enough sample. The problem with extracting hair samples from a particular area is that there's always a risk of contamination or something else blowing in. Yeah,
yes.
We really wanted a Bigfoot hair, but the bottom line is if you don't find something, it's important you say you don't find something. We were all persuaded, and there's that we could talk about this for hours, but to the best of my knowledge, we were all persuaded that there was a Bigfoot in the area, and we were after getting evidence of it, but we didn't get the hair sample, so therefore we cannot conclusively say that there was. Yeah, what I can say, and I'll speak for myself, is based on the encounters that we had, the level of sentience, the taking of the foodstuffs, the recording of all the data, that I am persuaded that there was. But persuaded is not scientific proof, as you know. That's my anecdotal conjecture, and it's nothing more. But it is a remarkable story. It's a remarkable story for a couple of significant reasons. Firstly, that a geneticist was persuaded by the possibility of evidence, so persuaded that he was prepared to fund his own expedition to launch it. Secondly, that he was able to work with forensics in Oregon. And thirdly, that a scientific research permit was requested and agreed to by that body. And those are significant steps in themselves. And of course, the whole project, the thing that isn't in dispute, produced the new bear species. So it is really a remarkable piece of cryptozoology, and this is a remarkable, in my opinion, is a very remarkable story. It's an amazing lifetime experience.
Well, and even when you get evidence sometimes, and let me relate this to your orang pendek, the Homo florensis, which some work was done on the cranial work here in Florida.
Yeah.
They are pretty certain at the University of Florida, Florida State, that it is definitely a new human species, and yet they're still quibbling about it. Now you've got people out there trying to say, well, it's a diminutive human only because it had hydroencephaly. I wish, personally, I wish they'd find another skull so they put that to rest.
Yeah.
but it's even well. I always joke that when you put three experts in a room, what do you get?
Mm. No,
Controversy. So
absolutely.
they never agree. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, which is why science is constructed the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to repeat an experiment, which you have been trying to do, and you have to be able to divorce yourself from your feelings and your beliefs and your anecdotal evidence and say, okay, I'm a scientist. That means I have to get this kind of information this way for it to be valid. And many people just don't understand that. And that, frankly, to get into a slightly different area that you may have strong feelings in as I do, this is part of the argument that I have with the kill versus no kill issue. When I hear people say, well, I'm going to go out and kill the thing, all I'm really hearing, not personally, is I'm so frustrated that I can't come up with an instant gratification that I'm going to go out and shoot anything whatsoever. Hell if it messes up their social structure. I want to prove this because I want to be on every talk show known to man and get a Nobel Prize. And if that's what you're into it for, you're in the wrong business. Get out. You don't belong in Bigfoot or science or anything of the kind. If you want to be P.T. Barnum, be P.T. Barnum. You'll find yourself a hoax to put off. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about that issue. I'm not sure where you fall, but if you want to talk about that, that's great.
Well, my own view is that there's. Let me start by saying I'm after DNA, and on your evidential point, there's a very good reason for that, because first-hand accounts, pictures, and everything else don't count for me. They're always subjective evidence. They're always open to interpretation, and even hard data is open to interpretation. But if you have the raw data as in the DNA, then you're talking about the interpretation of raw data rather than the interpretation of subjective accounts. So you've got a good starting point. Secondly, the point you make is very valid. If you are going to indulge in this sort of activity, and you say, well, I'm just going to go and shoot one, I think that's quite an arrogant approach. You don't know about the anthropological and social structures of these creatures, as you rightly say. They are undoubtedly quite rare. They certainly are extremely intelligent. And what I would be seeking to do is create a preserve in an area where there was DNA found, and we could take it from there, and organise those sort of studies so we could learn more about them. And I think myself that the production of DNA, there would always be people who would say habeas corpus, show me the body, but I think that the production of DNA would be a tipping point, a scientific tipping point that would lead to those sort of areas being preserved. And certainly, I feel, I'm speaking for him, and he may have a different view. I think that was Brian's view at the time. It's certainly my view anyway. And so, even if you are taking it from you don't need to shoot one. You shouldn't shoot one. And to aspire to shoot one seems to me to be narcissistic. I've never cared who has got proved that these creatures exist, because I've always I'm fascinated by what they are, and I'll be the first to shake the hand of anyone who proves them, because I want them to be proved, and for me it's an intellectual one. I want to understand what they are and what that means for us in our relationship to them. When I say us, I mean us as modern day humans. So I do not see any need to kill one in order to achieve that. And you don't know what you're killing if you do that. Even if it's not like hunting. You don't know what you are going to be killing, and it would be extremely arrogant to do so. And I've debated this point. And with people who would advocate killing them, and I've listened to what they have to say, but they have not persuaded me that their argument is a valid one. So we need to prove it to preserve the species, I don't think is a valid argument. I think that you can do that by extracting DNA, setting up a research project, because that would be the tipping point, and gradually learning more about them in careful and metered anthropological studies. So to use an analogy which is a crude one, there's been a lot of talk recently about an undiscovered tribe in the South American rainforest, and their first contact with people from outside their tribal group. Would you then suggest that we should shoot one of them because we want to study more about them? Well, of course you wouldn't. So what you're doing really is you're saying, I think, that we should shoot one because in some ways we're superior to them. That's what it boils down to. We're superior to them, so we should kill one to study them. That's what that means to me. And I think that is not correct morally.
We're back at a point where we needed to take a break, so we're going to do that, and we'll be right back. Hey, monster fans, tune in to Creature Zone on the Pangea Radio Network. I'm your host, Scott Marlowe. My special guests and I take a serious look at things that go bump in the night from a scientific perspective. Join us each week as we delve deep into myth, legend, and folklore to uncover the truth about creatures that science would prefer to forget or ignore. And I'm back with my special guest, Adam Davies, and we're talking about, right now, before we took the break, we were talking about the pro-kill, no-kill point perspective. Mm-hmm. And you make a good point. Given DNA and given the fact that we've got some pretty good genomes to go with now, particularly in the primate line, there is really no need to kill an animal to prove it exists because we know what the genomes look like. And DNA alone is enough to establish that there's something there.
Yeah, and I think the big point really for me is not whether we kill one or don't kill one, because I think that argument now is redundant. I think that for me the argument is having found the DNA. So having found the Bigfoot DNA, and as I say, there are samples that I have gathered from my activities in the US that are being tested right now. So let's say one of them came back, and the scientist who's currently tested him saying, well, there's something really interesting here. The question would be, what do we do next? Rather than whether we kill one or not. What do we do next now we found this? How do we move this forward?
Well, my personal feeling is we would pull the Dion Fossey thing and attempt to learn something about their tribal social structure, so that we get the data necessary to figure out how to conserve them.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. But that's the big debate you'll have in America.
Oh, yes.
Because I firmly believe that the DNA will be found. I think that if I don't find it as a result of my efforts in the last couple of months at Derek Randall's and Matthew Johnson's place, and I also went to Justin Smejo and Bart Coutinho's place, but I didn't get samples from there. But say those samples that we as the respective teams in those two particular areas gathered, if I don't get those samples there, somebody will get samples from somewhere fairly soon, I hope. And I know people have said, we've heard about this for the last 30 or 40 years and it's not happened. Well, we have to remember that the technology has moved on exponentially, as we've touched on in the last few years.
For sure.
And I also think scientists are more willing to work and test these samples than they ever were before. When I first started out gathering samples 15, 16 years ago, and we got some samples of the Orang deck with Hans Brunner, tested those. He was not looking at the DNA at that stage, he was looking at the structural health analysis. I remember him being challenged by his colleagues and saying, well, why are you doing this stuff? And he said, well, because it's interesting, it's science, yeah? And true scientists and people want to answer questions. And there are people who are secure enough in their tenure to indulge in these sort of activities. Brian Sykes, there was a lot talked about him, whether there was a conspiracy to cover up evidence and all this sort of stuff. Well, that's a nonsense. There never was. I mean, if we had got a sample that was a Bigfoot, he would have jumped from the rooftops. I can tell you now. He was interested to find something because he was curious about whether it was possible or not. In the same way that other scientists I've worked with, like Brunner and Todd Dissertel, and they may have their own doubts as to whether these things exist. But I can tell you now, if Todd was to find a hair sample and test it and it was an unknown species, he would, and especially if it was primate related, he would jump to the rooftops and say so. He wouldn't care. And I think that's a fundamental difference. So you've got increased technology. If a Bigfoot jumped out in front of me, I would take a picture of it. Don't get me wrong, I would. But pictures will always be debated. You yourself see all over the Bigfoot community, in inverted commas, that anything that's a picture is either supported assiduously or rubbished in a similar vein. But the DNA really matters, and that's what we need to focus on.
Well, it's concrete physical evidence.
It's concrete.
It's something that can't be, unless of course you're a microbiological engineer and you can pull all kinds of miracles with the structure of the DNA. It's just too darn complex to be able to hoax.
Yeah, exactly. And the things that I've been doing with in terms with Brian and with the other people that we've sampled, obviously we've had gloves, we've used rubbing alcohol, samples have been bagged and tagged, and then they're analysed by scientists. So it doesn't matter what I think. What I think's irrelevant in the great scheme of things. I understand that. It doesn't matter what my opinion is. What matters is the evidence that we gather and is tested, and that's what I've been about doing. I had some wonderful experiences with in that area with Brian and with Laurie and also in Derek's Olympic project and recently Matthew Sower with together with John Carlson. But it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what's tested. But I think I think you're on the edge of very exciting times in the US because you will get a DNA sample, I think, fairly soon. I think it will happen. And nobody... sorry, go on.
Well, I'm sure. But one of the things that I want to point out, and this is something that certainly Dr. Meldrum knows, there is only one great ape that has 5 parallel toe structures that we know of. Mm-hmm. And that is a human species, mm-hmm. meaning it's of the genus Homo. Mm-hmm. Well, the tracks from the Bigfoot creature that are considered the gold standard, and from my swamp ape here in Florida, mm-hmm. all have 5 parallel toes. Yes, there's some difference in the morphology of the footprint than is typical for a normal human, but those toes are parallel. So from an anthropological point of view, we've got 2 possibilities. One is that the animal belongs to the genus Homo, mm-hmm.
which means in my book that if you were to kill one, you're committing murder because it's against your own species, not specific species, but your own, let's say, general, your own genus. Mm-hmm. So that bothers me. And I'm not sure how the DAs locally, the district attorneys here, would interpret the law relative to murder and manslaughter with that issue. Number 2, if it is not of the genus Homo, then we have a parallel evolutionary issue that needs to be answered for anthropologists and anthropology science, physical anthropology in the least. Why did that particular species develop 5 parallel toes, and all of which is a major issue for anthropology science? Yeah, and one of the points I'd argue with the possibility of was parallel evolution with the orang pendek. If you look at my paper in Edge Science magazine, New Primate Species in Sumatra, I touch on that very point, and I agree with you. And to add to what you're saying, I think that the thing that interests me most, the thing that arouses my intellectual curiosity about all of this, is the sentience level of Bigfoot. I'm fascinated by just how bright it is and what that means in relation to ourselves. That's the big question. But
Yes, yes, and because it would be closely related to us, either from the same family tree, or actually from the same general tree,
Mhm.
it would have to be an omnivore in order to survive and have developed that kind of intelligence. It needs the meat fat in order to develop that portion of its brain.
Yes,
So that
certainly.
is also of great interest. But I see in other predators, for example, I'm a cat owner. I have been a dog owner. And when I see one of my cats sitting on the bathroom vanity in the morning, admiring himself in the mirror, knowing full well that the cat that he sees in the mirror is himself,
Mhm.
that's a kind of sentience too.
Yes, it is. But obviously, with the Bigfoot grouping, it's to what degree that sentience persists. And there's a whole plethora of debate about whether it's something closer to, say, the sentience of a gorilla or the sentience of a person, and we just don't know. We just don't know, and this touches on the quintessential point that I want to make, which is that, bearing in mind my point, and it is still an assumption that I believe that DNA will be found fairly soon, pointing to Bigfoot existence. I do think it's a matter of time. Whether I find it or somebody else finds it, it will be found. Then the question is, and the real debate that has not been indulged in any respect in the US at the moment, is what's going to happen next. What's going to happen next? Bearing that in mind, people talk about whether they should kill or no kill. That's a redundant argument in my point of view. Whether it exists or not, I believe it exists. What its mating habits are, but not all of those things need a starting point. And the starting point, which we both mentioned, is how is an anthropological study going to be conducted? What are you going to do? Because it's going to cause massive ructions. Can you imagine what will happen? There'll be all sorts of scientific organisations involved, different bodies, different institutes, whether we should section off areas of a forest and how that affects the economy. There'll be all sorts of debates that go on, which will cause a myriad of complications. They'll be wonderful at the same time, but they'll also be extremely complex. This is not the Congo where you can do, or Central Africa where you can do something like a Dian Fossey thing. This is North America, and that is the debate that once this radio show goes public, and Brian Sykes' book comes out. I mean, he may dilute or say something different, but I'm giving you my account, and this is exactly what happened in my opinion. So let's say he goes exactly in his account has parity with mine. I'm sure Laurie's will help. Then the debate I would like to see is what are you going to do next in North America? You really need to have that debate, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. There's been some discussion that the large Bigfoot organizations here in the States would then be forced to disband, yada yada yada, because you've solved the problem and what have you. But no, I don't think you've solved the problem at all. Science, as it always does, uncovers more problems every time it solves one.
Well,
It just means that you have to adjust your focus to a different aspect of the animal other than just finding it.
Yeah, you've only just begun. I mean, the thing is, you would only have just begun what you need to study. And it doesn't stop people going out and having fun and still looking for Bigfoot. But they may well be restricted in what they do and can do in those circumstances if the DNA comes back. It certainly won't be a fringe subject.
No, and one thing you will lose is the using Bigfoot as an excuse to go out in the woods by several of our hunter types here in the States. That just like an excuse to go in the woods every weekend to play weekend warrior and shoot something. and that will certainly be put to rest. But
oh yeah, they'd be in big.
as far as the genuine scientific work, no, that would just begin.
That would just begin. I mean, the idea of going in and doing that would be very big, very big stamped on, I would think. I mean, there'd be the argument. Well, now it's proved. Lots of different people will go out and try and shoot one, but I would imagine they'd get into very serious trouble if they started to attempt to do that.
Well, I certainly hope that we've reached a point, at least most people have reached a point, where the need to express yourself by mounting a head on the wall because you're the superior big white hunter is no longer a valid reason to go hunt.
Well, no, I mean, I don't subscribe to the point of view that as you know, I would never go out and shoot one. I mean, right now, I believe that I know where one is, yeah, and if I wanted to, I'm sure I could take a troop of hunters there right now, and I would stand a chance of shooting one, but I never would, because I think it's wrong. That's the bottom line.
Hunting an animal just to mount a trophy is no longer a valid perspective in the world. We have depopulated so many animals around the world to the point of extinction, if not very close to extinction, and those animals do fill a particular need in the environment, or they would not be there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, I understand now African elephants are in serious danger from something I read this morning. I mean, it turns my stomach to go on the internet and see pictures of people sitting next to one of their kills. I mean, I just can't comprehend it. And canned hunts, which seem to be very popular here, particularly in Texas, that's to me that's absolutely criminal. That's animal cruelty on a massive scale, and I just can't comprehend our country allowing it. But that's what can I say? I don't make the laws; I just have to follow them.
Well, I think you can strongly argue your point of view, and often laws are changed because people argue their points of view, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. I think it's the right thing to do if that's absolutely how you feel.
Well, we've reached a point where there's more tigers in zoos in America and around the world than there are in the wild, something's wrong.
Yeah, and I've got at home here, I've got a pug mark of a female tiger that was outside my camp only a couple of years ago. It was probably only about 20 feet from where I slept, and they are wonderful, remarkable creatures.
Oh, I love them. I've helped raise them here at some animal rescue facilities, and I've worked with quite a bit of wildlife. My son has inherited that love and absolutely adores wildlife as well.
Good.
So, that's all of my kids are embroiled in that. Now, I'm not particularly partial to reptiles, but I'm not about to go out and kill them.
No.
But one of my boys is an avid reptile person, and people here tried to kill some that they found in a valve box for the water supply, and he saved them rather than let them kill them, and took them someplace and released them. But but that's what I think needs to be done. The animal has every bit as much right to be on the planet as we do, and it just makes me bristle, as you can tell.
No, I know. Yeah, absolutely. And I think passion's good in wildlife protection. Absolutely. And the more we can do about it, the better. I mean, you see, the thing is, again, I think some of it can be arrogance. Why do people often shoot the tigers? It's to make some money. Yeah, it's to make money, and even in Sumatra, the poachers there, they're not starving. They're doing it simply because they want to make a load of money, and they know it's wrong. They're not uneducated about the fact that it's the wrong thing to do to poach. They know it's wrong. They're not starving. They're shooting it because they want to make a load of cash.
Well, there was a cool movie that came out quite a few years ago called The Naked Prey. I don't know if you remember it.
No, I don't think I do.
but it took place in Africa, and a white hunter was captured by a tribe, and then he was stripped and expected to elude his pursuers, who were members of the tribe. So it was really a shoe on the other foot kind of thing, where how would it feel to be the prey instead of the hunter? And I always liked that movie. Quite frankly, I rather think that one of the ways we should treat people who hunt for trophies would be to put them in that position so that they can empathize better with the animals.
Yeah. I think there might be some human rights issues there with the lawyers, but I understand your point, Scott.
Well, if we don't pay attention to animal rights, why should we pay attention to human rights?
No, well, and this goes back.
We are an animal.
Yeah, no, but this goes back to the point that that we were talking about earlier, as the biggest point for me is the sentience level of a Bigfoot and or of a orang pendek. Just how bright are these? How bright are these animals? And how much can they rationalise? And what can we learn about their society? It seems to me anecdotally that they certainly live in social groups, as you touched on. To what degree do they utilise a spoken language, and how does that operate within their society? This goes to the point, that we are at the beginning of our understanding of what they actually do and how they actually behave. And it would be remarkable, absolutely remarkable, to start learning about that within my lifetime.
Well, I hypothesize that their social structure is something like a gorilla tribe or a gorilla family, but it certainly would have some differences. And as far as the sentience is concerned, they have to be outrageously intelligent. Oh my God, to coin a phrase on the internet, they are the reigning hide-and-seek champion of the world.
Yeah. I mean, and that, I tell you what, that put me off a long time for looking for Bigfoot, because I couldn't get my head around how it could elude people for so many years in North America. As I say, I almost went everywhere else but North America until for many years.
Yes.
Because I had paid brief notice to the Patterson-Gimlin film, but no more than that. And I had no problem with thinking. I mean, people say sometimes there are tags given to things which are off-putting. So they say, oh, there's a Yeti in the jungle. People say, oh, BS. But if you say, well, actually, it's just what it is a primate that's learned to evolve bipedally or whatever else, then people say, oh yeah, that's potentially very interesting. But with Bigfoot, the thing that struck me was that I'm not always going into very remote areas. I'm not wading into some vast forest that takes days to walk into in North America. One of the things that I would love to understand is how has it managed it? How has it managed it? I know that vast swathes of America are still unpopulated, but there are concentrations of sightings, often near urban or semi-urban areas, and even if 99% of them are untrue, there's still a 1% which equate to many hundreds which aren't. So how is it doing that?
Well, sometimes the easiest place to hide is right in the open, in plain sight.
Absolutely.
And it may simply be that they're extremely good at that. I've often felt that this particular animal has much more sensitive eyesight than we do, and actually can see into both the infrared and possibly the ultraviolet range, which gives it very effective night vision. Because as well as I, and certainly all the other Bigfoot people out there, that they seem to hide from you even in the dark.
Yeah, I think it must. It certainly had superior hearing. There's no doubt about that. from my direct observation.
And it probably also has retained its pheromone sense, which humans have long lost.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would agree with that as well. It can probably see here. There's no doubt that it can see, hear, and smell you coming long before you know it's around. That's why these people who go out and try and hunt one would be extremely. I would be amazed if they're able to find and shoot one. They'd have to get a long range shot in. If one was traversing open ground, I can't imagine them being able to achieve anything in woods, because it would certainly be able to outpace them and know where they were. It would just have to be in those circumstances where one suddenly appeared
Well, there are a few accounts that I've heard from hunters who have drawn a bead on the animal when they've seen it, and go looking through their scope and looking the animal in the face, they found that they could not pull the trigger.
Yeah, and that would be consistent with accounts, say, of the Dutch colonists when they went to Sumatra. There's a few of those accounts, and there's a famous one, I think, I can't remember, from the 1920s off the top of my head. I mean, this is vague, where a Dutch hunter said, well, I saw the face of it and I couldn't shoot it because it was too much like a man. That's a hybridization of what he was essentially saying. But the bottom line is well, it felt like one of us. And I think a lot of the recent genetic testing has shown that, our previous understanding of when I was at school, there were these textbooks where there was the sloping ape at the bottom, and then there was this gradual progression upwards to our mighty evolutionary at the top of the tree, us as a species. Well, that linear view of evolution is clearly not the case, and we've touched on Homo floresiensis, Denisovans, Neanderthal. All of these things are, most scientists would say have existed in tandem with us for many thousands of years. And it's only in our relatively recent history that we have allegedly found ourselves as the only humanoid type species still in existence.
And then now you're getting into the work that the Max Planck Institute is doing with the Denisovans and the Neanderthals, and did they really go extinct, or were they just folded into Homo sapiens sapiens by interbreeding?
Yeah.
And yada yada yada. And does it really matter? Is this a species that is human that has avoided us for whatever reason, or is this a species that is significantly different in some respect, that it cannot mate with us and therefore has not been of any interest with us?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the important questions that we'll need to learn. And that's one of the things that interests me, and it's one of the and it touches on your point about parallel evolution as well. To me, it's not so much. For me, the question isn't. I know it's not proved right now, but the question isn't whether it does exist. It's always about what it is and where we take it.
Well, humans actually, as you know, have less chromosomes than chimpanzees, and yet we're 97% identical.
Yeah, and look at the difference between us and chimpanzees. They have, of course, they have a very hierarchical society, as you know, with alpha and beta males, and I would. The society of the Bigfoots, I know very little about it right now, but as I say, it does appear to have, from my own research, it does appear to have social groups. There were certainly groups of Bigfoots, and then there was this lone one that we spent a lot of our time researching that was the one that we predominantly interacted with, that betrayed a number of emotions. It could display aggression. There was growling. It also seemed to, on one indication, laughter. It definitely interacted with us. It was able to communicate on a basic level by knocking. I never heard it. I never heard any language from it. But obviously, other people speculate that that it does have language, and that would make sense. If it has this high degree of sentience, as we say. But all of these are speculative points, but they are remarkable speculative points, and I think I really want to learn more.
Yes, we need to take a break, and we'll be right back. Hey, Creature Zone fans, here's your chance to win a free autographed copy of my book, Cryptid Creatures of Florida.
During selected shows, I'll pose a weird cryptid trivia question on the air during our broadcast.
All you have to do is be the first listener to correctly answer the weekly trivia question, and you'll win that week's contest.
Just send your entry to us using the contact form located on our webpage.
Sorry, but shipping is limited to U.S. and Canadian addresses.
Today's trivia question is...
In 2007, the swamp ape was reported in Glen St. Mary's, Florida, by several local people and investigated by the news media. Dubbed the Taylor Wildman, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission investigator Ken Holmes eventually dismissed the sightings, claiming that the creature seen was actually what animal? And I'm back with my special guest, Adam Davies, and we're talking all things Bigfoot tonight. Yeah, well, that's a good point too, Adam, because obviously you can look at an animal like Coco the gorilla, chimpanzees who have been taught American Sign Language. They clearly have the capability of understanding symbolic language, but they do not have the anatomy to articulate as well as a human does.
Yes, exactly, and that's what we need to know about Bigfoot.
Yes, I mean, and I know that they can do it because I've had a dog that would try to articulate. And if he wanted to take a walk, he would go stand by the door or sit by the door by his leash, which I used to hang on the doorknob. And if you paid very close attention to the intonations and the differences in the bark, he would try to say out when he wanted to go for a walk, because what you get was an out, 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 out kind of bark. And yet when we used to keep his bag of dog food in a closet, and when it was time to have dinner, I'd go up to him and I'd say, "Are you ready for dinner?" And he'd go sit by the closet door, and you'd hear an entirely different intonation that would come out more like eek, 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 eek. My cat tries to I taught it how to speak on command. And, I can be in the shower sometime. The cat will come in the room and try to carry on a conversation. I mean, it's not nearly as elegant as that was with the dog, but it's trying to communicate. And, I have to play 1,000 guesses, and when I hit it, he runs like hell and, heads for the kitchen or whatever it is he wants if I hit the right word. But he knows what those things mean. So I'm sure Bigfoot is going to be at least that developed, if not more so. Now, whether they have developed a highly articulate language or not is anybody's guess. And until we get to that phase of knowing they exist and studying them, we can't answer those questions. There's one really good reason to preserve them, conserve them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, do you think that they've got a spoken language, Scott?
I'm sure they have some kind of language communication. I don't know that it would be what we would call ordinarily language and communication. I know enough about learning theory, having studied that in college, that there is no question in my mind that they are very capable of learning and do so quite quickly. If that's the case, they have to be able to communicate. If they have any kind of culture, they have to communicate what they've learned from the adult to the young within their tribe. That's the definition of culture. So there must be some kind of culture. Now, whether it's uniform around the world or not is anybody's guess. Most likely not. But there's got to be something there. There's got to be a way of communicating, even if it's the way most mammals communicate, by observation and emulation.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points. We can't necessarily make generalizations about what the Bigfoots in different areas will do or behave like. They may well have local and specific colloquialisms to their areas. So for example, one of the things that was apparent to me in the Cascades, or seemed to be apparent, is that the creatures there seem to live underground, and yet that's not the case, allegedly, in a number of other areas. So I do think that in different areas they'll adapt to their circumstances as and when, which is completely consistent with our models and patterns of behaviour. We've had different habitats depending on the climate and the circumstances that have shaped our own civilizations, and why not theirs?
Well, and assuming that observation is true, then you also have uncovered the fact that from a learning perspective, they have problem-solving intelligence. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that I wrapped an egg in a piece of in a napkin. Yeah, you call it serviette in America. Yeah, and I left the egg wrapped in the napkin to see how it would behave in relation to that. And the napkin was neatly unwrapped and unshredded, and the egg was consumed. So I was seeing how it would behave with that, and obviously if it was a critter, it would have shredded it. But
surely
the whole
so that experiment by itself demonstrates that it has opposable thumbs and knows how to use them.
Exactly. I was interested in whether it had opposable thumbs and whether it could unwrap things. And we put things in jars to see whether they would unscrew the jar. And what it had a particular penchant for in terms of foodstuffs. So what we're trying to do there is I was trying to understand a little bit about what its capabilities were. But
may I suggest an experiment to you the next time you get a chance to perform it?
Go for it.
It's rather low tech, but it should be right effective.
Mm-hmm.
Take another foodstuff that it likes and put it inside in a transparent Tupperware container with a sealable lid.
Mm-hmm.
Spray the top of the lid with Pam.
With what?
Spray. Pam. Cooking spray.
Cooking.
The spray stuff you use to line to line a cookie dish or a cookie sheet to keep it from sticking, and then dust it with flour. With a very fine-grained flour.
Uh-huh.
If the animal uses its hands, obviously, in order to open the container, it's going to leave dermal ridge prints that you can easily lift.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, I would definitely try that. And a lot of the experiments that I did were low tech and of that ilk. Yeah, because a lot of it doesn't matter about the technology. I think sometimes people can get too wrapped up in the latest infrared this and gigawatt that. What you're after is the best methodology you can in order to get the DNA and or any other scientific proof, and that seems like something that would really work. I mean, any of the jars that that we had with Brian Sykes, because we put things, obviously jars in apples in jars and things like that, were obviously taken away and subsequently analysed, and I don't want to know what the outcome of those were as we speak. But they were obviously taken off to the lab. But if you're an amateur researcher and you're out there in the field, then I think that's a good experiment, and I'm glad you shared it with all your listeners, because people should try things like that. And the other point I'd make in terms of field research is, look, you're not going to get the leading geneticist in the world to go and test your sample right now. In all probability, there are too many people who turn up with bags of moss saying, "Oh, I've got Bigfoot hair," It's just, and it happens. But what you can do as a learning process with your hairs is very simply buy a microscope, a cheap microscope, analyze it, stick the hairs under the microscope, and you can Google what human hair looks like, or deer hair, or raccoon hair, or anything else. And from that experience, you can judge whether you've got something that may be tangible or not. I mean, I'm fortunate because I've been doing this for a long time that I have contacts from people who will analyse my hair, but not always, because the testing process, people need to understand that the testing process for DNA extraction is expensive. It's, it can be a couple of $1,000s per sample. And so in order for you to get those samples analysed, you have to show good provenance. You have to show that you have detailed and documented research and get somebody interested in doing them. But,
well, yeah, and you must also, because no one is going to hang their hat on anything or make any pronouncements if you don't have a proper chain of custody.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So,
which most lay people don't understand, much less maintain, because a good example of that is, suppose somebody presents to me a hair sample and I test it and it comes back as being something unusual like pan-troglodyte swine furby.
Mm-hmm.
How do and then they tell me, well, we found it here in Arkansas. Okay, how does a pan-troglodyte swine furby get to Arkansas?
Well, that would be something.
From the Congo. Now, if they had one in a zoo, or had some in a zoo, it's possible that if you could go in the primate house and just by the dust around the room collect hair samples.
Yes.
How do I know that you didn't do that and you're just telling me that you found it in the woods in Arkansas?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And with the hair samples that I have gathered in North America very recently, I've said, well, go back there and get more samples, and said, because they will be subsequent further corroborative evidence if you do that. And then the next step then would be to bring the relevant scientists who've done the testing to those areas so that they can gather their own samples and witness it for themselves.
Surely.
But the starting point would be a sample that really is something that is unique, ideally. Yeah. If it was to break it down in very layman's terms, if there was a sample that turned up as a lowland gorilla hair from the Congo, you would be suspicious and say, is this from a zoo? Yeah, because what would that be doing in North America? But if you had a sample which was unique and could not be reproduced elsewhere, that would be something that people would sit up and take notice of. But what you want then is another sample and another sample and another sample. And if you've got a hair sample using the methodology that you used the first time relatively easily, then you should be able to get several others. And that's what you'd be after. Repeated samples so that you can repeat the experiment and do it successfully.
Well, which is, again, is part of the scientific method, which I really wish people would read up on and understand the reason why it's constructed the way it is.
Yeah, and I think they have to move away from the notion that there's a great pool of conspiracy of scientists who would absolutely suppress Bigfoot data, because that isn't the case, That isn't the case. I've worked with scientists who would be jumping from the rooftops if they got something.
There are many who are, because they're legitimate scientists. There are others who have built their reputations and careers on a particular issue, and of course there's not much incentive for them to discount their own achievements, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's true in every profession, not just science.
Yeah, absolutely, and they'd be afraid of anything that challenged those assumptions, because they're set in their ways in the same way as somebody would be set in their ways and uncomfortable. But cognitive dissonance works both ways. We talk about cognitive dissonance challenging people's viewpoints and them not coping with it. Well, cognitive dissonance can work in the scientific community as well, in the sense that long-held theories become almost like religious beliefs, and they can be difficult to break. But there are
Certainly, one of your countrymen can speak to that, such as the steady state theory, and Dr. Hawking developing the Big Bang theory and essentially proving it as being that's the way it happened. Because steady state back in the '60s that's the way it was. That's how the universe is. It always was, always will be. Well, Stephen proved otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think it took a long time for that to be accepted, but the bottom line was it eventually supplanted the steady state theory.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point in science that sometimes things can take a while to become accepted. Eureka moments don't really happen that often if you look at the history of science. There's often gradual acceptance of viewpoints that are at first assiduously challenged. So say we do get the DNA of Bigfoot, and it happens in the next year or two. I would predict that there would be, first of all, an eruption of shock and awe, then there'd be loads of challenging of it and vigorous debates against it, and then there'd be gradual acceptance as more and more data would be released. But it would take a while, and it would be a massive upheaval. That would take a while, but that's the very same thing as the history of evolution, isn't it? I mean,
surely.
Or with Copernicus and the orbit of the planets, how many years those things take to get accepted. So I think that there sometimes can be a misunderstanding about how scientific fact becomes accepted.
For sure. Well, we've come to the end of the show. As much as I hate to say it, I'm sure we could talk for hours on these subjects, especially since you and I are so in sync on our thinking.
Yeah, we are.
It's just been great having you on. I appreciate you taking your time and out of your real busy schedule.
No, it's my pleasure, Scott. I've enjoyed talking to you. This is the first time we've properly chatted, and one of the things that we've sort of mooted before historically is that will I come to Florida at some point and see you? And I'm sure I will over the next couple of years. That will definitely happen. I don't lightly know that point that will happen.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I found a new area that I've been working. I don't know if you followed my discussion of it on Facebook, but I'm fairly certain at this point that there's something going on there.
Excellent.
I have not yet been lucky enough to find track evidence, but I have found branch twists that certainly would require, particularly at the height that these twists are occurring, would require an opposable thumb and quite some strength. But the area is outrageously swampy. It's not a very nice place to be at night, especially if you're alone, because there's alligators everywhere.
Lovely.
I mean, it's not to mention extremely large rattlesnakes.
Yeah.
But it's remote, very, very remote. And the only thing in the immediate vicinity is cattle ranches. And of course, you know that the Bigfoot creature is frequently seen in conjunction with cattle, here in the States. So it's got all the proper hallmarks, and it's on the waterways that I believe the animal uses to migrate north and south here in the States.
Excellent. Well, that'll be somewhere
I would love to take you there.
Yeah, that'll be somewhere to go in the future, definitely.
Very good. Well, again, I thank you for being on with us tonight and for the fascinating conversation. It's been wonderful talking to you, and I'm looking forward to being able to do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. Nice to speak to you, Scott. Thank you for having me on your show.
You've been listening to Scott Marlowe's Creature Zone on the Pangea Radio Network. www.pangeainstitute.us. Hope to see you again real soon.